Hey everyone, it's David Barnett, and today we got Cole from Texas, and this is the first holiday chat call of 2020. Hey Cole, how you doing?
I'm doing good. How about yourself?
I'm doing really great. Um, Tell me about what you'd like to talk about today.
Yeah, so I am. I'll give a little bit of background real quick. I'm a young entrepreneurial-minded individual. I'm 22, and I'm. I've done a little bit of. I guess not. I've tried to start a business,
Hmm.
and I'm in the process of working with somebody trying to build up a business. And just from the couple months I've been doing it and have done it, I see the aches, the pains, there's a lot to it, and so entrepreneurship by acquisition seems like the most plausible, most efficient, and the best odds statistically speaking. And so that's
Yeah.
what I'm seeking. And so now that I've picked that path, I'm essentially trying to discover my long-term goals or explain, these are my long-term goals, and then work backwards from there to determine the best types of businesses to buy for me. And what I
Okay.
mean by the best types of businesses is like the industry to go into. Do I want an online? Do I want a brick and mortar? Do I want like an HVAC business or a plumbing business? Are there certain niche businesses like sheet metal business? How do these people find these? How do these people discover them? And how do they know that it's going to be a good fit for them?
Okay. So then why don't you tell me about the end of the road? Where do you want to end up?
So the end of the road for me is owning multiple businesses and being free to kind of explore and travel and pretty much do what you want. I would say is
Hmm.
my end goal is to have freedom to do whatever I please, whether that's to work or whether that's to hang out with my family more. And I want to do that by acquiring businesses and putting CEOs in place eventually to run those businesses. So I would say like the idea is to like the Warren Buffett of, business acquisition. Maybe I don't want I don't want to be worth $80 billion, but I want to be, I want to have enough businesses to 20, 30, 40, $50 million worth of businesses. Are you familiar with Andrew Wilkinson?
Just a little bit.
Right. So something like similar, like pretty much similar to what he has going on right now. He's got like $100 million worth of businesses.
So,
He
so
hires CEOs to run them.
hang on. When you say $100 million worth of businesses, do you mean that's the business's value or that's the amount of cash flow derived from them?
Um, I don't. I couldn't.
Okay, so let me
I couldn't say
ask
that.
then.
I would.
Let me ask you this question then, because it might be easier for you to answer.
Mhm.
What sort of income would you, in today's dollars, would you like to see rolling in from your business empire that you build up over the course of your career?
Uh, Millions of dollars. I couldn't lay a finger on it. To be
So
like,
millions
I
of
mean,
dollars
like,
a year?
yeah.
Okay. So, and here's why this is an important question. Because there's a very big difference between wanting to have an income of several million dollars a year or wanting to have enough income that you're free to travel and go and do different things whenever you want,
Hmm.
right? And so when you close your eyes and you imagine yourself in this future, when you're, maybe 25 years from now or whatever timeline you're thinking, what what are your days occupied with? Like, are you buying a new Lamborghini every Monday?
No.
Or right, well, but this is why it's important because um, when you actually consider what you want your day-to-day life to be like,
Hmm.
and some people do get excited about high status items and luxury goods and things like that. Um, I know people who've done well for themselves who got excited about those things and they bought a few of them and then they realized that they weren't that exciting afterwards.
Hmm.
And so getting into excuse me, is that getting yourself some businesses that can provide the lifestyle you're looking for could be a lot easier than getting a bunch of businesses that provide you with $2 million a year of income,
Right.
right?
I guess. I, what I'm not like a uh, I'm not like a seeker of like Lamborghinis and material things. Not that there's anything wrong with people that that have that
Hmm.
desire. I think the biggest thing for me is that the capital allows me to do what I enjoy, which is researching. I'm like 100 miles wide and an inch deep, and
Hmm.
so, but that's not that's that's good for like the people at the top, or not the people at the top, but if you have different people that go, you're the guy that goes a mile wide or 100 miles wide, an inch deep, but the people that's not going to be good to run your business. You're going to need somebody that goes, 100 inches deep
Hmm.
and or 100 miles deep and an inch wide.
Yep.
So yeah, so I know that that's my type, and so that's why I would want to hire like CEOs and things like that to put in place in different businesses. I know
Hmm.
I'm going to have to start out as the CEO of
Right.
whatever business I buy first, but eventually I'll be able to hire somebody.
So,
Um,
so the people that I know who own multiple businesses,
hmm
I can give you in a nutshell what their journey looked like. They they in one way, shape, or form ended up in their first business. So whether it was a family business they grew up in, or they bought it, or they started it, what have you, and
hmm
they became really good at running that business, and it was working really well. And
hmm
then other opportunities appeared, usually because people were able to identify them as a potential acquirer.
hmm
When someone wants to sell a business, one of the things they do is they say, well, who do I know? Or they'll hire a broker who will say, what kind of business might be an ideal buyer of this company? So acquiring multiple businesses always starts with being in one business first. And as soon as you have that first business and you can run it well, acquiring the other businesses is usually easier than getting the first one going or buying the first one.
hmm
So you had asked a question when you started off about how do you determine what kind of business to get into, right?
hmm
And that comes down to expertise and interest to a certain degree. I mean, you could say I'm really interested in a business that has a high margin and I can implement a lot of online advertising and automate processes with employees. And that business could describe many different kinds of businesses that you might get into. Or if you have a certain expertise in a certain field, it might dictate that that's the field you're drawn to. The biggest problem that most business buyers have for their first business is if they try to buy a business that is outside of their scope of expertise, they sometimes miss things that someone who's more knowledgeable about that industry might see.
mm
And so you wanted to go way out and then pull back, right? So in the
Right.
far flung future, Cole has multiple businesses, right?
hmm
And so then before that, you got to have the one business,
Right.
and that one business that you buy, you are going to, like you said, likely end up being the person running the business. So it's going to take a certain level of business management expertise, industry knowledge, etc., to make sure that you can properly execute that first management role of the first business, right?
Right.
So knowing, how old are you?
22.
22. All right, this is great. So you got time to work on this, and even if you make some mistakes, you still got time. So that's good. So have you done any kind of analysis about what kinds of businesses you really like? Like, have you thought about types of businesses at all? Or I know it was part of your question about how to
Right.
choose.
Yeah. So for me, I like. I'll give you a little bit of background. I've done. I know I like more short transactional, um, more like I would, yeah, short transactional types of businesses. I would say, like, for instance, when I was in high school, um, I ran a little eBay business, and I just flipped stuff that I
Hmm.
bought from my uncle's, or split profit with my uncle for, he did wholesale liquidation. So I bought and sold stuff. But I mean, it's like you take pictures of the item, you put it up there, and then it's listed, and then you don't have to deal with it until it sells, and then it sells, and it's like that. Where as like the business I'm in right now, which is a service business, is completely different
Hmm.
from that side. So I guess I've thought about it that way, and I'm good with the internet. I'm doing marketing right now, so I understand like Facebook advertising, Instagram, um, Twitter, like Pinterest. I understand these different channels that these older generational people might not be using as advertising right now. So
Hmm.
I understand that the power of that, and like if I went into a business where I could implement that, it could probably drive a lot of revenue
Okay.
to grow the business or something. So maybe something online is what I've been thinking, but I want to weigh like, for instance, if you bought like a sheet metal business, or I don't know, some business with quote unquote moat, what Warren Buffett would say is moat. It could be, like an industry that's has steady 10% year over year growth, or the business does, but it's not going to blow up 300 times like maybe you could do with an internet business. Whereas with an internet business, maybe you could blow it up and grow it 100% or something crazy when you take it over, but it might not have as much moat, and somebody else could come along and put you out of business rather easily.
Okay. So there's a whole bunch of different topics that you just touched on there that we should tackle. So first of all, um, industry growth rates. If an industry is growing, that's a macro indicator, and usually those figures are for a region, a state, or a country, for example. Um,
Hmm.
I think it's very comforting to know that an industry is growing, but in my experience, you got to be looking at the micro level. You have to be looking at the individual company,
Hmm.
and the thing that also you have to be aware of is that even if your individual company were growing at the industry rate, let's say it's 10% a year, that
Hmm.
doesn't necessarily mean that the profits or earnings of the business are growing at 10% a year, because businesses are asymmetrical systems. So you could have a business and make money, $1 million in sales, and you have a profit of 100 grand. Let's say your net profit is 10%.
Hmm.
You could grow that business by 10% and have a revenue of 1.1 million. But that new revenue doesn't require any changes to your overheads, just your direct inputs, labor and materials. So if the gross margin of that business was 50%, that extra 100 grand of revenue would cause 50 grand to go down to the profit.
Hmm.
So the profit, even though the revenue grew by 10%, the profit would grow by 50%.
Right.
So don't be too concerned about whether you think the revenues in an industry are going to grow by different rates. A lot of how well you do in business has to do with how you manage the specifics of what's going on in the company that you own. And so even businesses that are in low growth industries can do things to increase profitability, and their profits can increase far in excess of the industry revenue growth. This is why
Hmm.
people get attracted to business, because you can't, for example, you know, buy a piece of investment real estate and, you know, increase the profit by 50% in a year typically, right?
Hmm.
However, real estate is more secure in that it's just this big tangible thing. You don't have competitors and all kinds of other market forces that could hurt your business.
Hmm.
So, um, what I would actually advise is I would advise taking a drive around your city, in particular, maybe an industrial park. You talked about sheet metal and other kinds of industrial sort of businesses. Do you have an interest in that kind of sector?
Um, I don't really have an interest in the sector.
Hmm.
I just I just heard of it, and like listen, I've been listening to a couple different podcasts about acquisition entrepreneurship,
Hmm.
entrepreneurship, and just different businesses they own, and like the reasoning behind it, and like this sheet metal business, maybe that like and a business that's been around for 30 years that has these relationships built, and there's just uh I don't know what I would say, like moat a little bit to where it's
Yeah,
like steady,
it's established. They
right?
have
So, but
clients.
no, yeah, but I
Yeah.
haven't. I'm not like super interested in that. I guess
Okay.
I would just be interested in reducing the risk of buying a business.
So buying a business that is established, has good earnings history, has a clientele, etc. Those are the basic things people want when they buy a business.
Hmm.
Um, what you can do as an exercise is you can create a list of business characteristics that interest you.
Hmm.
You already mentioned transactional versus service. So maybe that would mean, for example, you might be more interested in a business that sells, um, air circulation fan components to HVAC installers rather than
Hmm.
a sheet metal business making ductwork for HVAC installers. Because again, once you introduce the project management part of it, then you're like doing a bunch of work. There's an opportunity for error, etc. Whereas, and it sounds like you're not quite interested in that. Whereas the company that sells them the fan, they just take it off the shelf and hand it over,
Hmm.
right? Even if they're doing business with the same customers all the time, it's more about managing inventory, etc. But you know the order comes in, the order is filled, the order is done, right?
Right.
That sounds like that's appealing to you.
Yes.
So that would be one of your criteria. So you start to build a list of criteria. So other criteria could be, for example, do you want a B2B business where you give trade credit to your customers? Like, again, that HVAC component parts business, maybe they give their customers 30 days to pay, for example. So that would be a business that has receivables and trade credit versus a cash business, which is like, corner store where people come in and you get paid in that moment when they take the things out
Hmm.
of the store. So that would be another kind of characteristic. And you can kind of go through the different aspects of a business and create a list of characteristics. Then you need to go and look around for businesses. And here's the one characteristic in particular, I want you to pay attention for. Is that particular industry dominated by big actors, big, companies, or is it filled with independents, small operators? Okay, so let me give you an example. Um, Oil refining is dominated by big companies, right?
Hmm.
It would be very tough for you as an independent business person to go say, I'm going to get into the oil refining business.
Hmm.
However, auto repair is a business with all kinds of independents. There's probably within a 10-minute drive of your house, you can find some independently owned auto repair businesses, right?
Hmm.
So that's got to be a key indicator on your list, because if you decide to target an industry where you're going to have lots of independent operators, it means more potential acquisition targets. And then it's a question of, how do I develop? You're 22 years old, so you're probably not going to buy a business next year.
Hmm.
You have time to start working in the industry that you eventually target. So let's say you choose auto repair. Say, I'm going to get into the auto repair business. Well, if you're not a mechanic, you can get a job maybe at customer service up at the front counter. Or maybe if the place is big enough, you can get a job with parts or ordering or other aspects of that industry. But it's going to give you a chance to start learning what goes on, how they manage their business, etc. And then you're going to want to leave and go to another one so that you can start to see the differences in the businesses.
Hmm.
And you're going to start to learn about that industry and learn about what works and what doesn't while you're saving money. Ideally,
Okay.
maybe there's an opportunity for you to work at a place that has an older owner, and you can, create a relationship with that person, and maybe that can be leveraged into your first acquisition. But it's going to be a lot easier for you to find an auto repair business that you can buy versus, and especially if you've been working in it for several years. If you show up at a bank and you have no experience in sheet metal and you want to buy a sheet metal fab place that builds ductwork, there
Hmm.
that's going to be a problem for the banker.
Right.
But if you show up and say, I want to buy an auto repair business, they're going to say, well, are you a mechanic? And you say, no, but I've worked in 6 different auto repair businesses over the last 7 years, and I've done these different jobs, And in my last job, I'm in charge of customer service up front, and I schedule all the jobs and I order all the parts and I talk to all the customers and I manage their expectations and I upsell them on maintenance packages and et cetera, et cetera. The banker is going to be very much pleased to be able to do a deal with you for that business because you've got actual direct experience. And then once you get into that industry, and you own an auto repair shop, well, then the guy down the street who you start to send your muffler work to, and this is just a totally random example. When he gets to the point where he wants to retire, if you've mentioned to him casually how you're interested in growing by acquiring other businesses, when he decides he wants to sell the muffler shop, he's going to come and talk to you first. And that's where you get that opportunity. And it makes sense, right? Because now you can leverage both businesses to drive customer traffic to the other business. Maybe eventually you buy a building, you put both businesses together and start sharing, front desk personnel, and you get efficiencies of scale and that kind of thing. Right.
Right.
So that's how, like, I have a buddy who's appeared on the YouTube channel before, and he's owned many different restaurants, and he did a deal to buy a seafood restaurant at one point a few years ago. And as soon as he bought the seafood restaurant, within a year, he was approached by 2 or 3 other people that owned seafood restaurants that wanted to sell. And before he bought his first, he worked for like years to find the right one to buy. And the difference is that from the vantage point of a business owner, they can't see buyers. Like, they don't know who in the public walking around wants to buy a restaurant. And this always has to be kept secret, right, to protect the value of the business. But as soon as those guys heard that somebody bought the seafood restaurant in the next town, well, now they knew someone buying seafood restaurants. They could identify him for the first time ever. And then they approached him when they wanted to sell.
Okay.
Yeah. And so, targeting an industry and getting some actual experience in the industry is going to be key.
Okay.
You can end up. Mm-hmm.
The reason why I asked that is, like, for instance, for online businesses, I know there's lenders that are willing to lend without any experience, and I wanted to get your take on online businesses. Have you heard of Quiet Light Brokerage before?
Yeah, I have. And
So,
I'd like to start by saying something really controversial. There's no such thing as an online business. And here's what I mean. Here's what I mean by that. There are just businesses.
Right.
So when I was a kid back in the 1980s, there would be advertisements in magazines because I didn't have websites to look at. And the advertisements would say, if you're interested in, I don't know, model trains, call for our catalog. And then you would mail them a letter, or you would call them and they would mail you a catalog because websites didn't exist. Right. And you'd look in the catalog and you'd fill in an order form and you'd write a check and you'd mail that to someplace, and they would mail you the thing because we didn't have Amazon. All Amazon is that exact same business model, except it happens on the World Wide Web. And so businesses have always advertised. You mentioned earlier about like Facebook and Instagram promotion and stuff like that. Businesses have always advertised. And you're right. Some business owners who maybe are of a certain age don't know about Instagram or how it can be used to market a business. There definitely is an advantage in understanding how to, develop new markets and meet new customers in new and different ways, especially if you have the field all to yourself. Like if you buy an auto repair business in a certain town and you're able to use geo-targeting to advertise, a tire special in that community to people in that town using Instagram who drive, then you can garner more attention than everyone else who's trying to, be on the radio, for example. Right. So when I hear online business, what it usually means to me is that people want to own and run a business where they just stay at home on their computer and they don't have to see or talk to anyone. Is that
Um,
kinda is that am I getting that kinda right?
maybe. I mean, I guess what I would say when I would say like an Amazon FBA business is what I would
Mhm,
say when I'm talking like online business. Um, yeah, I mean that might be. I guess I couldn't really say like I work from home now
mhm,
by myself, and it's nice, but I also miss interacting with people. I like talking with people. I like having conversations like this.
mhm,
So I think I have like an introvert and extrovert part of me. But yeah, I mean
mhm.
that may be interesting to me to like basically work from the computer or yeah. But I'd like to. I don't know. I it yeah. I mean like I'd be willing to do that
Yeah.
because
So the
I like an office with people where you can go in and like collaborate because I just like being around people and the connection that you get.
yeah,
But I'm not, I'd be willing to do something where I'd just have like my home office where I run everything over the computer
yeah.
or what you said, like alone.
Okay. So the the valuation multiples for these online businesses, like you just mentioned, like Amazon FBA, and to me that's super risky because your entire business is built upon somebody else's platform.
Hmm.
But the valuation multiples that people are paying for these businesses is going up incredibly high because there is a growing group of people who believe that these businesses don't actually involve work.
Hmm.
You know what I'm saying? Like they think that they're going to buy this business. Amazon takes care of delivering everything, and so there's no work to do. I know someone who's done Amazon FBA, and they ended up with hundreds of SKUs, and they ended up with teams of VAs to manage all the SKUs and update everything and make sure all the text was correct and their listings were right. It was a real business. Like it was a big business. They had all the same problems that every other business had,
Hmm.
and everything was done online. So a common theme in my business buyer adventure group coaching program are people with IT and technical experience and marketing experience, like what you're describing,
Hmm.
looking for businesses that have not adopted any of those tools
Hmm.
in order to make an acquisition and then implement those things to try and improve those businesses, which can be a real winning strategy.
Right. And that's kind of like that's kind of the two different pathways that I was looking at is like either buy a business that doesn't have these implemented or buy one that's already running, that already has, like advertisements down. They already have systems in place.
Hmm.
And then you kind of just hop in, learn, like whenever you buy the business, from what I understand, is there's a certain training period where the owner transitions the business to you, business relationships, all that kind of stuff. They'll transfer over to you over a certain period of time. And then
Hmm.
you can keep them on as a consultant for, I imagine X dollars per hour, um, for whatever, a year, or I don't know what the terms are, but that's what I've
Well, it's
researched. And so that was
it's negotiated every time.
right.
So it depends on the type of business. So for example, if you decide that, and again, we're using this example that I pulled out randomly, but if you decide that the auto repair and maintenance industry is for you, um, if you have 6 years of experience in those businesses, then that transition period is going to be a lot shorter.
Mhm.
And in fact, when you buy that business, you may be wanting to make changes rather quickly if you know that you have some best practices that are better than what are going on in that business.
Mhm.
And so that transition and handover period can really be affected by who the buyer is.
Okay.
Sometimes, for example, in franchises, the franchisor won't want the seller to do any kind of training or transition with the buyer because they know that over time people develop bad habits. And
Mm.
what they want is for the new owner to come to their training and learn from the latest, development program they have to train someone in how to run the franchise.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so for these businesses, like I know you said Amazon FBA, I would, it is risky. It's built on Amazon. If they make one change, then you could be out of luck or,
Mhm.
drastically increase. But say it's like a Shopify. store, or just an online e-commerce business or an online SaaS business, um, something like that is what, just anything that you can, that's like the job board, um, something of that nature, that's maybe not relying on it's not relying on Amazon, where like an
Mhm.
e-commerce store, you have your own domain. Shopify, it's a huge business that's in favor of the small business owner.
Yeah, and for
What's your take on that?
for people who don't know, Shopify is a service, and it's just they make it easy for you to set up a store online and accept credit card payments and things like that. So yeah, so to me, a Shopify store is like owning a real small business, like a store you would see on a main street in a business in a
Mhm,
town, right? So,
mhm,
there's the sporting goods store, and they sell this stuff, and all that is like a interactive online catalog. So you've got your storefront, your Shopify store, and then the next problem is the same problem that that main street business owner faces: is how do I get people to come to my store?
mhm,
So I like those kinds of businesses because in my mind it's a real business. You get to know who the customers are. You control the relationship with them. You can decide
mhm,
how you want to market. You can do email marketing. You can talk to them directly. You can send out specials and things like that. I like those kinds of businesses. Um, you have a greater degree of involvement in the fulfillment, of course. So once somebody places that order, then what happens? I've worked with business owners who have used contract fulfillment centers where
mhm,
all their product is made usually by a third party manufacturing firm, gets delivered to that warehouse, it's inventoried there, and then the warehouse does the pick and pack and sends it
mhm,
out to someone. And, you know, for every part of it that's outsourced, it makes it easier from the point of view of, yeah, it's just me sitting behind my computer. All those people take a certain part of the margins because they
mhm.
have to make money too. Um, and things change as these businesses grow. Um, really, again, Shopify is a great opportunity for maybe someone who's in a brick and mortar business who's never really done anything to develop any kind of online sales to do that. I know that when the pandemic
Mhm,
hit, I think they were offering 90-day or 120-day free trials because they were trying to help small independent brick and mortar mom and pop shops to get online so that
mhm.
they had a chance to do some business.
Yeah, that's an interesting path too. Is like a brick and mortar store that you can put on. Maybe you could purchase, and they haven't explored that avenue to put
Mm,
do online, and you could expand it that way. But I just want to get your take on that. Like first, just because I know, or from what I've just researched, people think, or I would say, from what I've researched, that there's a stigma out there that maybe these online quote unquote internet businesses are a little bit more risky than another business because there's lower barrier to entry. Like I could go on Shopify. It's a lot easier to start a Shopify or an online e-commerce business than it is to start a sheet metal manufacturing business a uh, or a HVAC business or something like that, because you got to have trucks, and you have to have equipment and things like that.
mm.
Whereas with this, most people have a computer, and it's 30 or $50 a month for a store. You get a couple $100 worth of inventory, and you can probably, you know what I'm saying? There's just a low barrier to
Right.
entry.
But you're talking about startup, right? I mean, one of the
Hmm.
reasons why there's a lot of businesses out there that trade for low multiples of earnings because they're risky, and one of the risks is new entrants, new people
Hmm.
coming into the industry. I mean, Shopify could be free, but if there's an existing player that has an email list of 30,000 people who've been buying stuff from them, that is the moat.
Okay.
The fact that the audience is already paying attention to the other store.
Right.
And so that new startup, hey, we're open now. We spent $30 to open our Shopify store, but now we have no audience. Nobody's coming to the store. So
Hmm.
then what does it cost to go and acquire customers? And this is why buying a business makes more sense, because when you buy the business, you acquire that audience at the same time.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
The,
And so,
the it's just getting expensive because, like I said before, there's this growing pool of people out there who think that because it's an online business, it's just all automatic.
mhm.
And it's often promoted in that way. There's a lot of
Right.
advertising online for these, oh, you can make money with very little effort working, a few hours a week. And, you can maybe set up your marketing to be to be automated, and you can have people, doing things, you can do things to generate traffic. That's all kind of automated. But when somebody receives their package and there's something wrong, well, guess what? A human is going to have to do something,
Right.
right? And that's
Uh-huh.
and that's the work of running a business, is all of the places where the systems break, or
Like,
you got a bunch of orders and then something gets back ordered. What do? Do you hold the shipments, or do you ship them incomplete and incur additional shipping charges for the missing product? Or do you take a
mm,
gamble and try to substitute?
mm.
Right. I ordered on eBay one of these laser thermometer things for taking my kid's temperature by, zapping them in the forehead. And what I got in the mail was uh, two electronic oral thermometers and a note saying that what I had ordered was out of stock, and hopefully I would find this replacement to be acceptable. And so, what if I didn't? You know, like
Yeah.
that
You're gonna have some angry.
probably chew
Might
up
have some
an
angry
hour of
customers.
someone's time on the other end of the conversation, right?
Mm, okay. Yeah, that stuff.
And
That's like what I enjoy. Is like, I don't know. I'm the whole interest in business to me too is just like I like solving problems,
mhm.
and I guess that's probably what most entrepreneurs like to do is solve problems and be free. um,
People like to
so
serve others, and what I've learned over the course of time is that the higher margins are usually in things that people don't like to do and are not necessarily easy to do. So,
what
like
do you have
like
some examples?
whatever is being done, right? And so it's not easy to provide medical service because you got to go spend all those years in medical school to be a doctor, and so the margins are good for doctors, right? It's a
Okay.
hard thing to do, and so um, I've seen businesses, and if your business is very public facing and everyone can see your business, it's easy for people to stop and think, I wonder if that's a good business for me to get into as well.
Hmm.
So the more public a presence a business has, the more opportunity I think there is for somebody to decide to enter the market.
Hmm.
And so this is why one of my favorite exercises to get people to do is to drive around industrial parks and go down the roads that, you know, where there's no big flashy signs, and there's these little industrial strip units that have, little signs on the doors where nobody's going there unless they're destined to go there, because that's the place you have to go for whatever it is they do.
Hmm.
And those guys typically can have a good business without a lot of people paying attention.
Okay. But are those businesses typically? Do they typically have like a lot of clientele, or does a lot of their business come from a couple people? I
Well,
guess
it
that.
it just depends on the industry, but a lot of the businesses that you'll find in that kind of locale, very few people are visiting them because they've got like sales reps out calling on people. They're talking to their customers over the phone or through email,
Mhm.
and
Okay.
maybe they're keeping an inventory of product there that gets sent out or delivered. right? And
Right.
so they're running this little business. They're not on the main street. So not everybody's driving by seeing them. And the people they do business with, maybe they only call them, every once in a while and place an order. So those people don't really see them as, a big business. It's just, hey, this is who we use for, our synthetic industrial gaskets or whatever, some
Hmm.
weird thing. And those people can build up a good business, and they can, if they're delivering product and having salespeople call on people, they can grow to cover big geographic areas without having to necessarily add all the overhead of additional locations,
Mm.
right?
Okay.
They
Yeah.
can, there's all kinds of little niche businesses that are serving entire states or entire regions of the country from one place.
So do you recommend something like that?
Well, it depends if that's where some of your interests lie.
Right. Okay.
It's, and this is why I say, create the list of business attributes and then go look at a comprehensive list of businesses. I always use the yellow pages as an example. Create a list of business attributes and go in the yellow pages and just start flipping through the pages and look at the different headings, for the business categories and say, does
Hmm.
this kind of business fit with what I'm looking for? And there's other lists of business types you can find online. Like you can look at the SIC code lists or the NAICS code lists. These are just like the government uses them for like lists to categorize businesses, but they're very comprehensive, and you can go through them and see different types of businesses and create a list of possibilities, and then learn more about those businesses. It's difficult to really push and work hard if it's a business that completely disinterests you,
Right.
right?
Okay.
And if your motivation and interest is simply to deliver superior customer service and make your customers happy, you can stretch that interest across a lot of different categories,
Yeah, that's
right?
probably one of my most. Um, I mean, like the product interest plays a little bit of part in it, but the biggest thing is I want to provide a more value to them. Like if they're going to give me, if they're going to pay me for some product or service, that whatever they're paying me for, they're getting their money's worth and then some. Like
Hmm.
superior customer service, I think that's. I mean, with anything, I think that's like that's really the kicker on top. Even if you have great work, if you have bad customer service, you're not
Hmm.
gonna, it's gonna be hard to do business.
Yeah, I run into that all the time. Especially in things like home services and a lot of trades and contracting.
Mm-hmm.
People can deliver top-notch work, but they don't return calls, they don't return emails, they don't show up when they say they're going to, and people just get annoyed by the experience of the process of trying to get the thing done.
Right.
And when it's done, everyone says, "Yeah, you did a great job." But I waited 4 weeks for you to show up,
Right.
and you never gave me any idea of when you were coming.
Mm-hmm.
And I was at my dad's last night, and he's always been a big supporter of small independent business. He loves supporting the small guy. And he started in the spring trying to get a new furnace put in his house. And we're in Canada, so there's a definite deadline by which time you have to have this project done, right? So he started in the spring. 3 different companies came, talked to him, took pictures, took measurements, promising him quotes. By Labor Day, none of them had delivered an estimate. 3 different contractors.
Wow.
So he ended up calling the multi-billion-dollar ginormous energy company, went to
Mm-hmm.
their website, filled in a form on like, you know, an evening in the evening one day. The next morning, a guy called him, said, "I'm going to be over in your part of town today in the afternoon. Can I stop by?" The guy came over, took pictures, took measurements. The next day, a technician came over to look at the site, and my dad had a quote the day after that,
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
right?
that's what I'm. Yeah, that's what I would like to. I think there's probably a lot of opportunity in the service business to create, something like that
Yeah.
where it's a top quality. It's a good, it might not be the most, it might not be the best the extreme best labor in the world, but it's going to be quality work, but the customer
Mhm.
service is going to be superb.
The reason those 3 other businesses weren't able to get their act together is because they're very busy, but more importantly, they're run by technicians.
Hmm.
They're businesses created by people who knew how to do that kind of work, not necessarily businesses run by business people.
Hmm.
And so I think you've made the decision that you're a business person and you're going to be working on these things. Have
Right.
you read E-Myth Revisited yet?
So I started reading it and I didn't get through it. It's just kind of like, I heard it's a really good book. Like the principles and concepts in it are really good. And,
Mhm.
I need to read it, but I mean, I wasn't in the position of owning a business and going through that, or even like at the point when I bought it, I wasn't really considering purchasing a business.
Mm.
So to make that a long answer short, I haven't. I read a little bit of it.
Okay. So you should read it because it creates this idea of how businesses need these systems and processes in place in order to make sure that they can deliver for the customer, etc. And you'll read about that in the book and about the description of how the author describes how you do it. Um, but there are all kinds of businesses out there. Again, we're talking about businesses, industries that have a lot of independent operators, so there's more acquisition targets.
Hmm.
We talked about auto repair, but home service as a category, things that get done at people's homes.
Hmm.
There are all kinds of these businesses that are run by technicians who
Right.
the businesses have never performed to their potential because the systems have never been put in place to properly manage how these guys work.
Hmm.
And so it could be very easy to make an acquisition, very affordable to make an acquisition of a business that has all these kinds of problems if you develop the skills to implement these systems and get these things going. You can
Okay.
create more profit with the same revenue and then create the opportunity to serve more customers with the same resources as you become more efficient.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. And then that just becomes a facto of like, if you can, I mean, the only reason why I wouldn't the like home service, the business would probably have to be big enough to where either the laborer works for you, or you can hire some laborers to do the work, or would you have to do it, or would I have to do it?
No, so I would say that you want to have a business that's at least big enough for the owner to be doing business while the service is being delivered by employees.
Right.
Yeah.
And what kind of capital would you need? All right. So I have a couple more questions that I want to get through
Sure.
before. So real quick though, what kind of capital would you need to buy something like that? Like what would you, for capital for a down payment, and then you get a loan on it?
Yeah. So a general rule of thumb that I find works with most businesses is if you can have about 50% of what the SDE will be. So SDE is seller's discretionary earnings. So if you want to buy a business that has $100,000 of cash flow to a full-time working owner operator, then you
Hmm.
want to have about half that cash.
Okay. And then the rest, you can get financing through the
Yep,
bank and seller financing.
exactly.
Okay.
So
And what size business would you say, like what size, um they don't use EBITDA for these size businesses, but like what gross revenue would you be looking for, or what sort of SDE would you be looking for in a business to buy, that would be sizable enough to have employees and things like that?
well, it's difficult because it would vary so much by industry.
Okay.
Right? I mean, you could have a business with
Mm-hmm.
$1 million in sales and 5 employees with an SDE of 100 grand, and you could have another business with sales of 400 grand and 2 employees with an SDE of 100 grand as well.
Oh, okay.
Right? So it depends on the type of industry and what they're doing and what their gross margin is and, what the
Okay.
inputs cost and all that kind of stuff.
A lot more You'd have to be looking at the deal. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
So but the first thing you should start with is trying to create a list of potential industries.
Mhm.
And the number one criteria would be that there's a lot of independently owned businesses in that field,
Right. Okay.
right?
And then that would help
Which,
with rolling up too, like you
yeah,
said,
well,
people.
exactly. Because if there's a lot of those types of businesses in your town, then, as you get established, maybe you can acquire some competitors. Maybe you can acquire some people in the neighboring county or the next town over, right?
Mhm. Right. Yeah, for sure. And then so I don't know, you're familiar with the term moat, but like how do you determine the moat of like a certain business or industry? I know like I read the biography on Warren Buffett and he kind of talks about it a lot. These
Mhm.
kind of businesses that pique his interest. Are you familiar with that or how do you determine that?
Well, the question is what does someone have to overcome to get into this industry? So, in order for me to
Okay.
open up a competing sandwich shop with if you're in the sandwich business, is I need, I could probably go find some used restaurant equipment, a sandwich, ingredient table, maybe a baking center, or maybe I could just buy bread that's already baked.
Hmm.
And then I got to get a food handling license and get inspected by the, county health guy. So while all that stuff costs money, it's pretty easy to do. People do it all the time,
Hmm.
right? And if you compare that with starting up a septic pumping business where I'm going to go clean out people's septic tanks who don't have city sewer, right?
Hmm.
Now I got to get, a $500,000 truck or more. I got to get all kinds of environmental permits and special handling training and all that other kind of stuff.
Hmm.
And I got to, figure out where I'm going to take the stuff, and I have to meet whatever requirements those people have, whether it's some kind of, government agency or a private, you know, remediation place that accepts that waste.
Right.
So the hurdles that someone has to jump over to get into the septic business are significantly higher than opening up a sandwich shop.
Okay.
And this gets reflected in the valuation multiples. So people who are selling a sandwich shop would get a much lower multiple of cash flow than people selling the septic business.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they're harder to acquire, more capital probably.
Yeah, and another great one is how price sensitive are the customers. So if you're in a business where you serve people regularly and you have a price increase, they're going to notice.
Hmm.
Whereas that septic pumping firm, maybe they go visit a home every 2 or 3 years. So
Ah,
they
okay.
could have like a 10 or 15% price increase, and the person who hired them can't quite remember what they paid last time,
Right.
right? So they're not as likely to say, "Wow, they're expensive. I'm gonna go with someone else next time."
Hmm.
Whereas if you've been getting a $10 lunch special at your local restaurant and one day you go in, now it's all of a sudden it's 10.75.
Yeah, you're gonna notice.
Yeah, and it feels like more of a burden because you're paying that 75 cents all the time,
Right.
right? And they created an expectation in you that your lunch is $10.
Hmm. Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So another question I have is, it kind of goes back to the working in the industry or not. So I
Mhm.
have the job I went to school for is a third assistant engineer on ships, like cargo container ships, whatever, big ships, 800-foot, 1,000-foot ships that um, sail across the ocean. Anyway, there's an opportunity there and I just got married, and so we can live off my wife's salary,
Mhm.
and I have a rental property that I bought when I got off the ship. So we were still like, making net after all of our expenses and even a little bit spending money, probably $500 a month we're saving. um, I could go on the ship and make for 6 months of work. So either 60 days on, 90 days on, or 120 days on, and then 120 days off, make anywhere from 90 to $110,000 a year,
Wow.
um, which is a substantial amount of money for being 22. And
Mhm.
so what I'm battling with right now is, should I go do that for 3 or 4 years and I mean, that's pre-tax. I'll probably walk away with 70, but it's still a lot, and save that up, 100 to $300,000 over 3 or 4 years, 5 years, and use that to buy a business, or should I go work in an industry where it's going to be a lot harder to save money, but I'll get the experience?
That is a great question. And my answer is actually going to be to do both. So if you can go ship out for 90 days and then have 90 days off, in the 90 days you're off. I mean, I know it's nice to have time off, but if you could be doing something like having a casual position or going and getting different work experience for people that need extra help in these different industries that you identify, you
Hmm.
can be banking money and you could be going out and learning about these different things. When
Okay.
you're on the ship, what's your workday like? Are you working like 16 hours a day, or do you have a
Yeah.
reasonable amount of time off?
12 hours, 13 hours a day. So, I
Okay.
mean, when I'm off, I'll read books or listen to
Yeah.
podcasts, is what I do. What was you going to recommend?
No, I was just going to say, like, um, any industry out there, like you're looking at business stuff and buying a business stuff and things like what I have on my YouTube channel.
Hmm.
When you finally identify certain industries, you'll realize that there's an internet of information about those specific industries too.
Okay.
So if you go searching online, you're going to find guys who have podcasts about how to run your auto repair business
Mm.
or your muffler shop or your transmission shop or whatever it is.
Right.
And
Okay.
so when you identify those industries, you can then start to immerse yourself in the chit chat that those groups have going on to
Right.
start to learn more about the specific type of business.
Okay. And so, okay. Yeah. Is there any industries that you would recommend that you could go get a part? So the issue, I did that whenever I went originally on the ship. I was
Mhm,
doing meat, like steak sales for a company, and it was
mhm.
just a rotational job. So I could just find something like that, or there's certain industries that have just part-time work that would work with like 90 days on, 90 off, or just don't tell them and just work for them for 90 days.
Well, I don't think it's necessarily I don't think it's a good idea to be deceptive,
Right.
because if you explain your situation, anyone who owns a business is gonna appreciate the fact that it's hard to say no to the kind of money you can earn on the ship. Um, and you never know when that person is gonna be instrumental in helping you do a deal
Mm.
or could help introduce you to someone whose business you might end up buying.
Right.
So you always want to approach this from the point of view that you're trying to build yourself a position in the community where
Mm.
people are going to respect you and
Right.
that you can be seen as an honest person, a good dealer.
Mm.
Um, with respect to sales, working on sales skills and how to deal with customers and how to make sales is probably the skill set that is the most transferable across all different kinds of industries.
Mm.
So if you create a list of 5 or 6 or 7 different industries that you think might be possible for you to go and buy a business,
Mm.
working on sales skills is gonna give you the opportunity to get into those different businesses. It's the one thing
Right.
nobody wants to do, but
Sales.
it's the most yeah, but it's the most important part of any business.
Right. If you're not selling anything, you're not making any money.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah, that was my other thing I was thinking about, um, trying to look for, instead of going on the ship, looking for somewhere to sell, learn sales at, and just doing that full time. Because I mean, you can make a good amount of money doing sales as well
Mm,
if you like you can make more than what I would make on the ship.
yeah, and the one thing I'll caution you about learning how to do sales is that there are all kinds of sales courses you can spend thousands of dollars on. Um, just get the classic books about sales and
Hmm.
then get experience. There's nothing that will teach you more about sales than actually doing it.
Hmm.
And I knew a guy that had a Sandler franchise. Sandler Sales is one of the big established names in sales training.
Hmm.
And the people who did the best with the programs were people who were in sales who would do the program and come and learn the material, and then they'd be able to go back, immediately and apply what they learned. And
Right.
those people had the best results in improving their ability because they were
Uh-huh.
in it every day. The whole idea that you can take a course that teaches you sales and then go several weeks later and walk into a business and then start selling what they're selling, it's a lot more difficult to transplant those skills.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's definitely putting it into action. I started reading books, and there's a book I'm reading now. It's called How to Get Rich. It sounds pretty uh the title's awful, but it's actually a really good book. It's by Felix Dennis. He's a founder of a couple magazines over in the
Hmm.
UK. And he talks about like you can have all these great ideas and learn all this stuff, but if you never put it into action, it's worthless. So I like that
Yeah.
that's essentially, if you're getting all this training but you're not able to put it to action, then it's not going to do you any good.
Yeah. No,
I know
I
it's
agree.
3 o'clock, but if could I squeeze one more question out of you?
Yeah, sure.
Um, so the last question I have is, do you have any experience with hiring CEOs or been in relations with people dealing just with businesses of people hiring CEOs? If so, how do you recommend finding them? And like what does that look like?
Okay. So this is a big topic. And let me tell you that, you know, as you grow and build your businesses, it's not really the person that would call themselves a CEO that you need. So you need to understand a business. Then eventually you're going to want to put someone in place to manage that business, but you need to understand what's going on in the business so that you can create a system for knowing what's happening when you're not there.
Hmm.
So the analogy that I make is, if you look at businesses that have a lot of locations, so there's a lot of, like, I don't know, Texaco gas stations or BP gas stations or something. Each one of
Hmm.
those gas stations has a manager. Then there's a regional manager who's watching the managers.
Hmm.
You need to develop the skills of the regional manager. How do you see what's going on in those different locations without actually being there and identify
Hmm.
what areas need to be addressed? Because someone who is a CEO, they're going to have a lot of the same skills that an entrepreneur would have. They're used to making big decisions about strategic vision and direction and all this kind of thing. But the other thing that CEOs have access to are teams of people and resources to execute all these things.
Hmm.
Most small businesses that you are going to acquire in the early part of your path are not going to have the resources in place for someone like that to leverage,
Okay.
right? Like the CEO
Yeah.
might say, "We're going to start sourcing this from China." And then, in your business, who does he turn to execute that plan, right? There's a mismatch between that idea of a CEO and the world of small business.
Mm. So
That
you'd have
that's
to grow
you.
it to a reasonable size.
Yeah, it's you. Like, if you decide to get into auto repair and eventually you own 30 auto repair locations,
Yeah.
well, then maybe you're going to hire a president or a general manager that's going to be running all of them.
Hmm.
But setting the strategic vision of that business, even that business, is still going to be you,
Right.
right?
Okay. So I guess it's just until it grows to a certain
Yeah.
point of the growth. Because I know this is like a extreme example. There's not many people like Warren Buffett, but obviously there's a lot of people in place in his businesses to where they're all making the strategic decisions. But it's just they're at so much scale that they have that ability.
Well, and Warren Buffett invests largely in publicly traded companies.
Right. Well, like
So,
before, for instance, Geico, like got Berkshire Hathaway owns Geico outright.
mhm. But when he made his big investment in American Express,
Hmm.
he didn't have to find a CEO. All
Mm.
that stuff was
Okay.
already there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, that definitely helps out a lot, and I appreciate the knowledge, the insight that you provided. It's definitely helped me to guide me and kind of get started here with my journey.
Awesome. Well, thanks for calling in, Cole, and have a great, happy holiday season down there in Texas.
I will. You too. Have fun in Canada.
All right. Thank
All
you.
right. Thanks, David.
All right. Bye bye.
Bye bye.